your hands dirty. We like that. Yeah, that's interim management. We like to solve problems. You will never take a seat of a family member. You are there to help out and solve those issues that the family has lying on the table that they want somebody to take care of.
People think it's Middle East, they have billions and trillions. There is nothing like restructuring, crisis and turnaround.
There is. Of course there is. I mean, every company has their room for improvement.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to welcome you to our next episode of the podcast, Conversations with Executive Interim Managers. Today, I'm very happy that my friend Xander Kruger joined us. He's a very experienced international executive interim manager and, of course, a cross-cultural expert. He's Dutch, he's living in Spain. We are sitting in Dubai and we'll be talking about the transformation of a family-run businesses in the Middle East. Xander, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Bohuslav, for having me on the show. And what can we wish for? A nice scenery behind us.
Exactly.
So happy to be back in Dubai. Obviously, this is the Middle East is my second home, and it will always remain like that. So
Okay, perfect. So introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
yeah, so the journey started back in Europe. I have been operating as a senior manager, leading multinational organizations. Then I was approached by an interim company. It was my first exposure to interim management. Then I eventually came into the region, the Middle East region. And I think that's really where my experience started. So having been operating here in the Middle East now for over 16, almost 18 years, how can I describe it? It's just amazing to be back and to help out companies succeed in doing the transformation, in growing, in modernizing, in professionalizing. That's really what we're all about, right?
Exactly. So you really accompanied this city, this region, along the transformation journey. I can imagine 15 years ago, there wasn't a view like this.
No, and actually the first time I was in the Middle East in Dubai goes back to 1992. So there was the Meridian Hotel right in front of the airport, the Dubai Creek behind it, of course, and that was it. So there was no Sheikh Zayed roads, there was no downtown. So yeah, that's a long time ago, and it's always marvelous to see how the city and the country, because it's not only, of course, the city, it's also the UAE and other regional players as well. Saudi Arabia, of course, being on a huge development project. We have Oman next door. Qatar has been very popular lately because of the World Cup, yes. But also historical players, smaller players like Bahrain, also in the region. So yeah, it's amazing to see how the Middle East grows. And of course, within the growth comes also the need for growing the companies, right?
Exactly.
And the challenges linked to that.
And transforming the companies.
Absolutely.
So let's jump into your transformation journey of a family-run business.
Mm-hmm.
What were the key takeaways?
So the experience normally is related to understanding the values of the families behind it, the traditions. It's not always easy as a foreigner to jump in and to deal with that. So you have to be humble, as are the families, and how I have felt always from minute one dealing with the families. So they are very humble, but they're very proud of their legacy, of what they have been creating till the day of today. What I have experienced is, of course, a need to do the changes that are required, the transformation, whether that's corporatizing an organization, and we can go a little bit into more detail about that, whether it's change management, business transformation, sometimes even turnarounds. So it really depends on the challenges that the family company has lying in front of them, and the vision of where they want to go is where you as a manager would step in and help out.
So what was the main trigger? Was it a family succession, or was it an external trigger like we want to go to IPO or we want to enter new markets? What was the trigger?
Sometimes it happens over dinner tables at family level, and the wide thinking, right? The imagination that you let flow happens, that we need to grow, we need to become more international, we need to corporatize, we need to have a structure in place, and that happens normally over a dinner table between different family members. Then taking that down to management becomes a challenge. And that's really where the need and help comes in from professional outside people. And sometimes that the management teams that are in place do not have that same vision as the owners. Sometimes they don't have that capability, with all my respect, because they have been part of a successful growth story. But they are, how would I describe it? They are in a scenario where professionalism is missing. Whether it is to grow through an M&A, they have never come across a deal of doing an M&A in the region. They have never come across getting involved in a due diligence. They have never come across integrating. And we all know that when you do an acquisition, 80% of the acquisitions goes wrong with the integration. Yes. So it's not so much the skill set of the industry. They know the industry very well. They've been involved with that business for many years. But the new technology, the new evolvement of growth, internationalizing, going abroad, is something that they are quite limited to. Yeah. And that's where the external help comes in.
That's exactly where the executive interim managers, international managers like you, jump in and hit the ground running.
Yes, I would say so. I mean, it's how would I just it's you don't come in from minute one and change the values of a family organization, right? You make sure that the family is aware of what they want. What is their vision? How do they want to evolve their company to the next step? And what do they need in order to do that? Whether it's introducing a new ERP system to connect their companies, whether it's professionalizing their sales force, whether it's opening up another hub from Dubai going into Saudi Arabia or going into Egypt. So it really depends on the topics that the family members have on the table that they want to then push forward and execute on. And that's where the interim manager, with his experience or her experience, comes in, and it evolves and develops. So I would always recommend that there is a pre-start of a project where you are capable of sitting down with the family members and challenging them with questions of what they really want. Yes. Yeah. So it's taking that conversation that happened on the dinner table and taking that to a structured approach and setting targets against that. Once you have that buy-in from the family, and of course, with the family involved in that decision-making process of what they want, is then when you start executing on the interim side. So if it is a topic on M&A, you will then start executing it. You will come up with recommendations to the family of who needs to be bought, where it needs to happen, and how you're going to be dealing with that, how you're going to be transforming that business and integrating it.
Okay, very, very interesting. But before transforming, let's go a step back about the decision making. How is the decision making at the family level, whether we're talking about the family offices or the family companies? We're talking sometimes here about billions and trillions of value that they have under management. How is the decision-making process different than a decision-making process anywhere in Europe in corporations?
So it is less structured.
Mhm.
So the ambition is there, the vision is there of what they want. But as I mentioned, it happens more or less on a dinner table or a lunch table, where maybe the chairman, by hierarchy, it's normally the elderly person in the room who has that vision and puts it on the table. And it then gets discussed between the family members. And at the end of the day, then there's this traction created, this emotion behind it. It's very emotional driven. There are probably a lot of disagreements and arguments between the family members on what they want. And there has to be, at the end of the day, somebody pulling or pushing forward that idea. And sometimes I think it is missed that an outside executive, is part of that conversation from the beginning to help and guide, set expectations as well. This doesn't happen overnight, right? We are talking about traditionally very established family businesses, very successful in the region, but they have to go forward. They have to keep on growing. They have to expand. They have to professionalize. And those are the conversations that sometimes happen between the family members without yet the interim manager or the leader, the executive leader, external leader, being involved in those conversations. Very important. Why? Because it's in a certain way, it prevents future failure conflicts. Yeah. And I can give you examples on that in my experience, where certain members of the family had it very clear what they wanted, but they didn't have the whole family on board.
Yep.
And then you have conflicts of interests. Your process gets slowed down. And unfortunately, sometimes you have problems between family members, which I'm always the first one to try and avoid. We all try to help and do the best for the company to succeed, both the family, but also the leadership, the management, or the interim manager if he steps in.
Yes. It's very important to know the scope and have the agreement or alignment of the family members before you start your mission. Otherwise, at least from my experience, however good you are in implementation, the project is designed to fail.
I fully agree. And there are examples of that. Yes. It is, and I always think that the worst scenario you can have is disrupt a family bond, right? Because that's something you have to protect as much as you can as a leader, as an external leader. And therefore, I think it's always extremely important if you can be present of those discussions over a dinner table, and you can then maybe get involved and take that off the dinner table into a professional meeting, set your agenda, set the points, and have an agreement and, after all, a buy-in from all the family members. If you're not there yet, then that has to stay still in the kitchen, as they would say, right? That whole project.
Exactly. You cannot skip this step.
No.
You cannot speed up. You cannot speed up.
No.
Good. You are here at home for 20 years almost. But we see from the numbers, I just read it on the way here in a taxi, there's been more than 100,000 people moving in to Dubai last year. And the number will just go up and up. No? So there's a lot of managers, permanent, but also interim managers coming into the region. What would be your recommendation for them when they start to work or try to work for family offices here?
The key thing is communication. And communication starts by listening. So the legacy, the experience, the trajectory that the family organization has had is extremely important to learn, understand, to understand what their values are. Because we all have these big statements, right? Mission, vision. But the reality is, what does the family really, what is the DNA of that family and how they feel the company? How have they grown and become successful?
Mhm.
And that's something I would recommend to each interim manager, not just to step in and roll up your sleeves and get into your hands dirty. We like that. Yeah, that's interim management. We like to solve problems. But you need to do one step before that. You need to understand and get the buy-in, have them on board, and brief them, communicate constantly with them. What are you going to do? Why you're doing it? And what are the benefits for them in going forward? If you keep that momentum going and you keep them informed, you have a smooth ride. If you don't do that, you will cause friction at board level, at family level. And that's something, as I mentioned before, we always have to avoid. We always have to avoid, yeah. So communication would be the number one, is to understand, to communicate very well, to listen very, very well. I spend a lot of time listening. That doesn't mean that it slows down. It takes speed away, no. But it's extremely critical to make sure that you don't make any mistakes in those values that are so important for family organizations.
So what were the main differences or the main benefits for the family company after you finished the mission?
Growth, obviously.
Yeah,
I guess.
could be growth, could be value recovery.
Of course. Look, I mean, there are different scenarios that I've encountered. So there are different value propositions family organizations have had towards bringing my expertise on board. One company was looking for growth, yeah, and that growth came through M&A, that in the region. That growth came through setting up hubs in different countries in the region and even outside of the region. That's one issue that I've dealt with. I've also dealt with turnaround scenarios where a company has gone south, as they would say, in terms of their numbers. Yeah. So where you have to kind of a crisis scenario and to take care of. I have had issues where you had to face with driving professionalism, driving excellence in organizations, whether that's on the operational side, whether it's on the commercial side, where you're basically trying to bring the teams up to the next level. Bringing in KPIs, monitoring, having a CRM system installed so that you can track and monitor performance. So all these elements become extremely important in managing the organization and setting the expectations as well, making sure you align what they're looking for.
What were the main difficulties you encountered that you can share now?
So if we talk about my experience with family organizations, I would say the disalignment at the family level, where certain family members have very clear what they want, and where you can, from minute one, understand where they're going, and you kind of buy into that because you agree with what they want. And then you have other people on the family, just as important, who are skeptical or who see the external manager as a threat rather than collaboration, working together. When you're an external professional, you're not there to take their seat. You will never take a seat of a family member. Yes, right? You are there to help out and solve those issues that the family has lying on the table that they want somebody to take care of. And therefore, I think it's extremely important, going back to what we were telling in the beginning, right? is to make sure that you're either part of that dinner table conversation, or if that happens in the board meeting room, then you're in the board meeting room, but you're already having those engagements with the family members to make sure that everybody is aligned in what that company wants. And I think that's the most critical one that I have come across, is the misalignment between family members.
And family members.
And then you're stuck in the middle sometimes, yeah? And I've had, unfortunately, heated debates between family members where, sometimes screaming happens.
That happens.
Yeah,
That happens.
screaming
Yeah,
happens, yes. It happens in the best families.
yes. So it's for the good of the family.
It is.
Definitely. Good. Now let's move from the family business, traditional family business, that's for sure exciting, to standardized corporations. You've been also a managing director of a large multinational firm. How is the business? How is doing business different here at a large corporation than in Europe?
Good. If I have to summarize, the biggest difference is the processes that are well established in large multinational organizations, whether they're abroad or they're in the Middle East, because there are already a large multinational operations, local operations, in the region. So I think the processes are well defined, well established. I think that's a critical one. The structures are in place. I think that's number 2. So the right people at the right place, and everybody knows what they're doing. They're KPI, they're monitored. It's a smooth diesel engine that rolls and works. If I would compare that maybe a little bit to a family business that would want to get to that, it's like they're sitting in a sports car and they go and they slow and they go and they slow and it's not that smooth diesel engine that keeps on going. And so I think that's really where the big differences are, is how to bring that Ferrari that you put in first gear, then in fifth gear, then you go back. How do you bring that to a smooth operation? I think that's number 1. The second thing is speed of decision making. So generally they would say, big multinationals are very slow in the decision-making process. No, actually not. Not from my experience. They're actually quite fast. Yes, there's a hierarchy. There's a matrix management structure in place in big multinationals. But at the end of the day, the decision-making, if it's the right multinational company, can be really, really fast. Whether it's an investment, whether it's expansion of your teams, that decision is taken really fast. Sometimes in family organizations, that speed is missing at a certain, and there's too much thought process behind taking that decision eventually. And I think, again, external help, experience, guiding family members through that process, because you have seen it before, I've seen it before, how to deal with that, is extremely helpful for them to build that speed in it, but to make sure that engine becomes like a diesel engine that keeps on going.
Talking about speed, how quickly were you deployed from the initial contact till you landed at the door of the company or the family office? How quickly are interim managers deployed here in the Middle East?
So, Bohuslav, this is a good question, and I'd like to differentiate a little bit, because you've got obviously the route from a permanent role to the route of an interim role.
Yes.
Yeah. So if we talk about the process of a permanent role, when you engage with a recruitment company, when the client has decided what they want, when the search company goes out, interviews, gets the onboarding done, you have your integration into maybe your first 30, 60 days in the operation, you're talking about a process of 6 months. Yeah. If you're very lucky, you can do it in 4 months. But you have to be very lucky and have a good database of people. If not, you go to 6 months. Now, if that's on the long run, that's fine. But a quick fix, right? You have a problem lying on your table now, whatever that problem is.
Especially if we talk about restructuring distressed assets, etc.
You need to do it today, right?
Just don't
Better
get the 6
yesterday.
months.
You don't have 6 months to wait for that. That's where the interim manager steps in. So if I go back to my permanent roles that I had in large companies, whether that's conglomerate, family-owned organizations in the region here or multinational companies, it's about a six months process. And I'm not even talking about your notice period to leave maybe
Then
previous company.
the notice period and onboarding and everything.
Yeah, so it can be. But if I go back to your initial part of your question, interim management, I was in the region in 48 hours. Yeah, so there was a previous conversation that took place with the board members, where the board members at a certain moment said, okay, he's the right person to lead this project. At that moment, 48 hours in the region. And I remember the last assignment that I did in the region here was COVID. So I was stuck back in Europe. I didn't know if I would be able to get on a flight. Which flights? I mean, there was limitation on flights getting into the Middle East. I wouldn't know exactly what I would encounter as well in terms of the pandemic. And so eventually I did get out here, and I got in here 48 hours after basically the green light was given. So that's really how fast it can go with interim management. Is extreme. And you're standing in front of the door to do the work today.
Immediately.
Yeah. So I remember I flew in. I think I arrived here at 1:00 in the evening. So in the morning, the next morning, and at 8:30, I was standing in front of the door when the previous managing director was told to leave, and I was standing there to take over. Yeah. So
what would you recommend to interim managers in such situations? I mean, you land, you jump in within 48 hours. You land here in a completely different cultural landscape. If we're talking about non-Middle Eastern managers,
sure.
You shake hands with the existing CEO or COO, CFO, who is just told to clean up the task.
Yeah.
What is your recommendation for the interim managers for the first 48 hours, 48 days?
I think there are two key points. Number one, the one that hires you has to be 100% convinced, and you need that backing. So when you walk through that door and you enter, you need to know that the people behind you are supporting you. A second thing is stabilizing teams. In my case, when I took over, the previous CEO was there for 12 years. Yeah. So it was difficult for the teams. It came as a huge surprise for those team members that were left in the company. So you have to step in and spend quite some time in stabilizing teams. It's not always needed to give reasons why, because you're not part of that. That's corporate. Yeah, it's a corporate decision why that was taken. You're there to carry on.
Yeah,
carry on.
Yeah.
So, and that's extremely important to communicate to the team, is to make sure that the team is aware, is number one, we are here to carry on. We're not shutting the business down. We're here to do the changes because corporate is requiring it, and I'm going to drive it with you. And that's extremely important, to spend quite some time with the team members, especially your management team, to make them feel comfortable in that new person is gonna be a good person to work with. Yeah. And there will be hiccups. There will be, this is a roller coaster. There's going to be good times and bad times. But it's extremely important to spend time communicating, learning also their problems, what has not been listened to in the past by the previous CEO. What would they like to see changed? And how can they contribute to that change if that change is solid and required?
We see it in several projects. Once the interim manager steps in, the people, the management, are a little bit shocked. he came to fire us or something like this. So it's really important to calm down. And that's where the essence of interim management comes into place. The interim manager is an external person. He will not stay in the company. He will not replace anyone. He will deliver what is necessary. And after 6, 12, 18 months, simply leave the company without going into the politics, relationships, internal, external. I mean, usually what we see in some of the projects in Europe, they are at locations that are a bit remote, so like a small village where everyone knows everyone. It's different here. I mean, it's very different, but it's really an important point. Yes, calm down the situation and stabilize it.
Yeah.
With stabilization and situation, you touched a bit at the triggers. Could be distressed assets restructuring, could be operational efficiency, or could be growth. So let's summarize these 3 topics and split them into 2 turnaround scenarios. One being financial and the other being operational.
Mhm.
Which one plays a bigger role here in the Middle East? People think it's Middle East, they have billions and trillions. There is nothing like restructuring, crisis, and turnaround.
There is. Of course there is. I mean, every company faces their problems, or every company has their room for improvements. Yeah. So, as I mentioned previously, when I my last assignment, I was called in to replace somebody who has been with the organization for 12 years. Yeah. And when you go in, you think everything works smooth. No, actually, no. You get called in because there was a decline in revenue. Top line was dropping, which had never happened before. And bottom line was going into red numbers. So that your mission number 1 is that needs to be transformed immediately. There's got to be a turnaround here. Yeah. When you then jump in there, and that happens probably with all the interim managers, is you discover a lot more issues.
Completely different.
A lot more issues. Whether that's accounts receivables, whether that's working capital, whether that's lack of control of your stocks. So you discover a lot more issues that have to be taken care of, and therefore you can't lose sight of what the main mission is, which is turnarounds. But at the other hand, in order to get to the turnaround, you have to fix the other problems first, right? Because part of your turnaround is fixing the other issues that are connected. So whether it's accounts receivables, you have an issue with your clients, they're not paying on time, or your collection is not adequate. Whether it's out of control of your stock, it's your cash, you're managing. So you have to look at the big picture. What is my mission number 1? What are all the intangibles or the variables that have an effect on what the big picture is? You have to take care of that.
Yes.
So coming back to your question, I think in the Middle East, it's more on the operational side, the issues. The improvements can happen easier, faster. The transformation and the changes can happen faster there. Normally, there is not so much issue on the turnaround side, but the scenario is changing very fast. Yeah, and I always say this with a lot of, coming back to the family organization traditionally in the region here. Look around. We were discussing this when I came here for the first time. There was nothing here. So let's imagine that you're into cement. You're a cement manufacturer. If we just look around what has been built, anybody would have grown, right, in this market.
Yeah.
Anybody. Yeah. If you're a paint manufacturer and you paint residential houses, you would have grown. There will be a certain moment where that growth slows down, where your market becomes more saturated, where suddenly you find a lot more competitors than you used to have. Yeah. If you go back 20 years, 25, 30 years back, when you started your company here, you hardly had any competitors on the ground. So if you had a construction company here, you were alone. Maybe there were 2 or 3 more players. Yeah? Now that's completely changed. It's first of all, it's a global world, and the Middle East, because it has been growing so much, so fast. Everybody wants to be in this market now. So you're dealing now not with 2 or 3 competitors anymore. I would say any industry right now here, any industry in the Middle East is having probably minimum 10 competitors. Minimum.
It's an extremely competitive market.
Yes.
Extremely competitive.
So that requires also transformation in your organization. To number one, to maintain what you have, but to keep on growing. I have one example that I would like to put on the table is somebody was telling me once, and this goes back to a family member. We year on year, we give our targets. They don't call it budget, they call it targets. Yeah. To our different business units. It is quite a large organization in the Middle East with different hubs and different manufacturing sites in the Middle East. And the chairman, he would say to me, we normally give a target of 5%. And he was really proud and happy with that. And I said, why 5%? What's driving you to the 5%? Because we've done that for years and we've grown 5%. I said, have you ever challenged the teams and it could not maybe be 10%? No, but we are fine with 5%. So I went back and I thought, okay, I have to be correct. I have to understand the values going back, yeah. But the next day, I decided to challenge that.
Okay.
And you go back and you say, Mr. Chairman, with all my respect, 5% is great. But I've done some due diligence into the markets. And I have seen that the market is actually growing 10%. So you're growing below the market.
Losing market share.
And worse of that, your competitors are growing between 15 and 20%. So you are indeed losing market share. That conversation changed everything. It was an eye-opener for that chairman. And obviously, nerves then get involved, emotions get involved. Yeah. And then you get into a discussion, what can we do about it? Yeah, what can we do? Okay, that now you go from having targets to preparing professional budgets and KPIing it, setting measures in place, driving policies that structure things. It becomes a completely different discussion then.
But this is only possible by bringing in external managers. If you're a family member from a small child growing with the family, with the company, you do not challenge your father because 5% is not enough.
Correct.
So that's the benefit. Why companies hire people like you?
Sure. You're absolutely correct, and I always say this with a lot of respect. I have dealt with family organizations also back in Europe. It's not much different. Yeah, it is also the grandfather who started the organization. Then the father takes over. Then he has 2, 3 children who he would like to take over. One maybe is not interested at all taking over. The other one is maybe not suitable of taking over the company. So you always have to kind of analyze what is happening in the family organization. It happens in Europe, it happens in the Middle East, it happens in Asia. What I think is extremely important is once that's defined within the family, you have to be able to challenge certain decisions with respect, communicating in the right way, sometimes even waiting for the right moment. We all have our bad days, yeah, and it's always also important to respect that. But you need to be able as a manager to be able, as an external manager, to be able to challenge the ownership and say, this has to change because it's not correct. Why is it not correct? With data. I'm a fanatic about data. So I would always put certain data on the table to be able to reinforce my statements. And as I mentioned before, going back to losing market share, that's data driven.
That's data driven.
And when somebody sees that, You can't go around it. So I think it's extremely important to communicate that to the family members. But coming back, there's not much difference between a family organization of how they want to grow and what organizational family issues they have in the family in Europe than it is in the Middle East.
Probably in the decimal place.
Probably, yes. Yes, yeah. So the capability, I would say definitely here the vision, and I'm sometimes extremely surprised because it's not always the younger generation. That's a myth, right? It's even the elderly generation who has more vision, who has more appetites than the younger generation. I've been really surprised sometimes to see how well they have educated themselves on how businesses evolve. So if we talk about, artificial intelligence, you would be surprised how well they are aware of what that can add to their companies. So immediately they would say, here's a couple of millions available, put that into my company, right? I want it tomorrow, or I want it yesterday. But they are well aware that that is the way to go. Yeah. So if you talk about ERP systems, I would like to have SAP in my organization. We're all integrated. Good. So the vision is there. They know what they want. How to do it sometimes is difficult, or they don't have the right people to do it. That's where the interim manager steps in.
That's why we are here.
That's where
You touched a very important point. We started with traditional hierarchical organization, transformation. Let's move to the AI, artificial intelligence, and digital transformation. I mean, from my experience being here, we live in a far future here. Everything is digital. Yeah. If you don't have an app for something, you don't exist. You disappear from the market. So what's the role? Maybe two questions. What's the role of digital transformation and AI here in the region? And what's the role of the region in AI and digital transformation? We see Saudi Arabia said data is the new oil. We want to be the number one in data centers. We got all the energy we need for it from the sun.
I think here I should give a lot of credit to the Middle East. I think they're way ahead of Europe. Way ahead. Yeah. So I'm probably not the right person to teach or to bring my experience to the table of saying, here's where you can improve, because they're way ahead. And we see this in Dubai, or Saudi is catching up so fast as well. Everything is digitalized. Whether you get your driving license, or you get your Emirates idea, or you go to do any government work that you need to do, whether it's paying your electricity bills, everything can be done online. It's really amazing. It's very frustrating to go back to Europe sometimes and see all the red tape and all the problems that are lying there. And there's so much interim management that needs to be done there to help out companies. But in reality, Bohuslav, I'm probably not the right person to say that they're doing something wrong. I think they're well ahead of the game. Now, what I do believe is, I'm talking mainly about government entities. There's still probably a lot of room to bring that to the private sector. Yeah, so bringing that digitalization process from the public sector over to the private sector is probably where there's still a lot of room for improvement. If I take that back to Europe, it hasn't even reached the private sector yet, except for some really big companies. So that I think that in the Middle East there is still room for improvement on the private sector. In the public sector, as they would say in French, chapeau, because they're way ahead, and they're pumping money into that because they have it very clear. That's where it's going. Yeah.
Okay. What would be, Xander, your 3 recommendations for family companies, family offices thinking about transformation?
So I think the first thing is the family has to have very clear where they want to go. And the interim manager has to be very involved in understanding where the family wants to go.
Mm-hmm.
That's not only we would like to expand by M&A. No, that is also understanding who's on board of the family. What are the problems that the family thinks the organization can give by doing an M&A in the integration process? Because that's key to know that in advance before you do the transition. So I think it's extremely important that you are, as an interim manager, very close to the family members. Hopefully they're all on board. If not, be close to the key decision makers and the ones that really want to drive it. Number one. Number two is make sure you communicate over and over again about what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and what is the expected outcome. And report back on that. It's not micromanagement. Please don't misunderstand me. We're not talking about spoon feeding the chairman every 5 minutes on what's happening. No, that's not also, at a certain moment when you professionalize and you corporatize, right? The family members do one step back. They've maybe been involved in the day-to-day activities, but they have to learn how to do small steps back and let professional management drive the business. But that doesn't mean they get cut off. It's a collaboration. It's working together. It's communicating. It's building on their legacy. It's making sure that that business that they have been sweating and been fighting for years, and that's given them revenue and wealth, keeps on going. So communication, making sure that you constantly are aware of the values that the family members have. I think it's extremely important, the values. It's extremely important as well that it doesn't always become exclusively transactional. I mean, we like this word now. There's somebody who loves to do the transactional melody out there, but it's not purely transit. It's very emotional. It goes deep down, much more than Europe. So it's important that you learn that as well. It requires a learning curve. So people who come into the region, who have had experience in the region, will find it easier to adapt to that. If you're a completely outsider, it might cause a certain challenge. And then I would always stress that you have to put on the table that you want to grow the organization. At the end of the day, you want to continue growth. If you don't grow, you might run into some headwinds. So you always have to have growth. Whatever is required around growth, whether it's professionalizing your teams, whether it's, as I mentioned before, installing an ERP system so you're interconnected, whether it's outsourcing your warehouse management controls, 3PL. So everybody still likes to keep everything in-house, right? I've got my nice trucks there who do the delivery. What is your core business? Stick to your core business. What are you good at? Maybe it is logistics. Fine. That's your value added. Don't change it. But if that's not your value added, if you're a chemical company and your value added is in formulation, forget about your logistics. Do the outsourcing if required. I'm not saying that needs to happen, but look at that. Maybe there's a cost saving that can lie there. Maybe there's an efficiency service advantage that you can give to your clients by maybe outsourcing it. So look back to your core values and stick with that. That's sometimes, I think, also very important for the interim management in the region to look at when they step in. So communicate and make sure that you evaluate how that business is run, what can be professionalized, and what are the issues that you can maybe find the cost savings or efficiency improvements.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure having you.
You're welcome.
It was a really, really nice discussion.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you very much for your time and for inviting me here.